Once upon a time, in a kingdom far away, lived a king and queen who longed for a child more than anything in the world. Every day they would wish, "If only we had a child," but their wish remained unfulfilled. One day, as the queen was bathing, a frog hopped out of the water, sat before her, and said, "Your wish shall be granted. Before a year passes, you will have a daughter." And just as the frog had predicted, it came to pass. The queen gave birth to a daughter so beautiful that the king was overcome with joy. He decided to hold a magnificent feast to celebrate. He invited all his friends, family, and acquaintances. But most importantly, he invited the wise women of the kingdom, hoping they would bestow their blessings upon his daughter. There were 13 wise women in his kingdom, but the king had only 12 golden plates. And so, one of them had to be left out. The feast was a grand affair, filled with splendor and joy. As it drew to a close, the wise women stepped forward to give the child their magical gifts. The first gave her virtue, the second gave her beauty, the third gave her riches, and so on, each bestowing a wonderful quality. Just as the 11th wise woman had finished giving her gift, the doors to the hall burst open. In stormed the 13th wise woman, the one who had not been invited. Her gaze was dark with fury, and she was determined to have her revenge. Without a single word of greeting, she cried out in a loud, chilling voice, "In her 15th year, the princess shall prick her finger on a spindle and fall down dead." Then, without another word, she turned and stormed out of the hall, leaving a stunned silence behind her. Everyone was frozen in terror. But then, the 12th wise woman, who had yet to give her gift, stepped forward. While she couldn't completely undo the evil curse, she could soften its blow. She spoke in a calm, reassuring voice, "The princess shall not die. Instead, she will fall into a deep sleep that will last for 100 years." The king, desperate to protect his beloved daughter from any harm, immediately issued a royal decree. Every single spindle in the entire kingdom was to be collected and burned. He hoped that by destroying them all, he could prevent the curse from ever coming true. As the years went by, the princess grew into a young woman. She was blessed with all the gifts from the wise women. She was beautiful, kind, modest, and so clever that everyone who met her couldn't help but fall in love with her. The fateful day of her 15th birthday arrived. It so happened that the king and queen had to travel, leaving the princess alone in the castle for the day. Feeling curious, she decided to explore. She wandered through every room and corridor, every nook and cranny of the vast castle, until she came upon an old, forgotten tower she had never seen before. She climbed the narrow, winding staircase inside. At the very top, she found a small door with a rusty key in the lock. She turned the key, and the door creaked open. Inside the tiny room, an old woman sat busily spinning flax on a spindle. "Good day, grandmother," said the princess cheerfully. "What are you doing?" The old woman looked up and nodded. "I am spinning," she replied. The princess looked at the spinning wheel with fascination. "What is that thing that twists around so quickly?" she asked, her curiosity piqued. She reached out and took the spindle in her hand, wanting to try it for herself. But the very instant she touched it, the dark prophecy was fulfilled. The sharp point pricked her finger. In that very moment, her eyes grew heavy, and she fell back onto a nearby bed, sinking into a deep, profound sleep. And that sleep didn't just fall upon the princess. It spread like a magical mist throughout the entire castle. The king and queen, who had just returned and entered the great hall, fell asleep right where they stood, along with their entire court. The horses in the stables, the dogs in the courtyard, the doves on the roof, and even the flies on the wall fell silent and slept. The fire in the hearth, which had been flickering merrily, grew still and slept. The roast on the spit stopped turning, and the cook, who was about to scold the kitchen boy, fell asleep mid-sentence. The wind died down, and not a single leaf stirred on the trees outside the castle walls. Around the castle, a great hedge of thorns began to grow. Year after year, it grew thicker and taller until it completely surrounded the castle, hiding it from view. So dense was the thicket that nothing could get through. The only thing visible from far away was the flag on the castle's highest tower. A legend began to spread throughout the land, a story of the beautiful sleeping princess. Known as Briar Rose, many princes from neighboring kingdoms heard the tale and, captivated by her story, tried to make their way through the thorny hedge to reach the castle. But their attempts were all in vain. The thorns were like sharp, deadly hands that caught them, and they could not break free. They all met a grim fate, trapped within the unforgiving brambles. Many, many years passed. One day, a handsome prince from another land happened to be traveling through the country. He came across an old man who told him the legend of the thorny hedge and the castle it concealed. He spoke of a king's daughter named Briar Rose, who had been asleep for nearly 100 years, along with her entire court. The prince was fascinated by the story. He had heard from his grandfather that many princes had tried and failed to get through the hedge, but he was not deterred. "I am not afraid," the prince declared. "I will go and see the beautiful Briar Rose." The old man tried to warn him, but the prince was determined. By a stroke of fate, the 100 years of the curse were now complete. The very day the prince arrived was the day the princess was destined to awaken. As he approached the fearsome hedge, he did not find sharp, menacing thorns. Instead, he found a beautiful wall of large, lovely flowers that parted on their own to let him pass, and then closed up again behind him like a hedge. He entered the castle courtyard and was met with an eerie silence. He saw horses and hounds lying on the ground, fast asleep. On the roof, doves sat with their heads tucked under their wings. He walked into the castle, and the scene was just as still. Flies slept on the walls. The cook in the kitchen was still frozen in his pose, hand outstretched, and the maid sat with a black chicken in her lap, ready for plucking, both deep in slumber. He continued through the silent halls, seeing the entire court asleep with the king and queen sleeping on their thrones. The silence was so profound, he could hear his own breathing. Finally, he made his way to the old tower and climbed the winding stairs. He opened the door to the little room, and there, lying on the bed, was the Princess Briar Rose. She was so breathtakingly beautiful that he couldn't take his eyes off her. He leaned down and gave her a gentle kiss. The moment his lips touched hers, Briar Rose's eyes fluttered open. She awoke from her long slumber and looked up at him with a sweet smile. Together, they walked down from the tower. As they did, the king, the queen, and the entire court began to wake up, looking at each other in astonishment. The horses in the stables stood up and shook themselves. The hounds jumped and wagged their tails. The doves on the roof flew into the sky, and the flies on the walls began to crawl again. The fire in the kitchen flared back to life. The cook gave the kitchen boy the scolding he'd started a century ago, and the maid finished plucking the chicken. The wedding of the prince and the beautiful Briar Rose was celebrated with all the splendor and magnificence a kingdom could muster. And they lived happily together for the rest of their days. Their love story, a testament to the power of patience and the eventual triumph of good over evil. The curse was finally broken, and the kingdom, once frozen in time, was filled with life and joy once more.